do you think the most difficult role in the universe is? The hardest job? If you said parents, you may be right. If you said teachers, you may be right. You may have other ideas too, but not many people would argue that those two roles are not challenging. We have expectations about what those roles mean and what it means to be good at those roles. And we have expectations about what our students, our children should be able to do, how they should behave, what strategies and skills they should have. We're going to talk about all of that today. Welcome to the Homeschool Connection, essential for learning executive function strategies. My name is Mindy Scirri. I've been a learning differences coach and consultant since 2006. I've worked as chair and education professor, and I've also spent many years teaching students and teaching teachers, general education, special education teachers, working with parents and families, and doing mindfulness stress reduction. I've also focused a lot on executive function, academic difficulties, and I'm a homeschool mom. I also write content for homeschool curriculum companies and resource websites. I'd also like to introduce my co-host, Dr. Jane Gertler.
Hi, my name is Jane Gertler. Welcome to the Homeschool Connection workshop. I have a background for decades as both a teacher and school administrator in general education and in special education and in public school and in the independent school world. I am really committed to the need for executive function strategies. And one thing I was very proud of in my career was bringing the SMARTS program to the school that I was working at in New York City for learning disabled children, because we were able to see the significant difference it made in their life and in their feeling of success when they had a strategic and consistent way of applying executive function strategies.
Here's our agenda for today. We're going to be talking about executive function and the context in which it is used by students, our expectations for them. We're going to be talking about 3 areas of executive function, including organization, time management, and working memory. And then we're going to give you some tips for how to bridge that connection between home and school. Okay, pop quiz. Do you agree with these 4 statements? The first, intelligence is related to executive functioning. Is that true or false? The second, we should tell children with EF difficulties to think before they act. True or false? EF difficulties are simply behaviors that need counseling or therapy. Is that true or is it false? We should consistently prompt a child with EF difficulties. True or false? We're going to suggest that all 4 of those statements were false. We should avoid equating intelligence with executive functioning. There are very many very smart people who have difficulties with executive functioning. We should avoid asking children with EF difficulties to think before they act. They may not be developmentally ready. They may not have the executive function skills available to do the thinking before the acting. We should avoid seeing EF difficulties as behaviors that need merely counseling or therapy. Rather, these behaviors may need strategies. We may need to teach them directly to use executive function strategies. And number 4, we should avoid being a child's surrogate frontal lobe. We should not prompt a child consistently and create a prompt dependence. Rather, we should work toward executive function strategies that can build independence. So now let's turn to what is executive function.
Executive function is a broad term that's used to describe the complex cognitive processes that are the foundation of most of our goal-directed behaviors. These processes include organizing, prioritizing, shifting flexibly or cognitive flexibility, accessing working memory, and self-monitoring. Executive function processes are critically important for academic success, yet they're not often taught explicitly in classrooms. To create a classroom culture that promotes the use of executive function strategies, teachers can develop a systematic and strategic approach that extends beyond the classroom. When teachers stress the students' use of strategies, that it's as important as accuracy, then strategy can become a mental habit. And at home, just as Mindy said before, we don't want our kids to become dependent on us. So we want to explicitly teach executive function strategies to our kids and to model those strategies for them. The SMARTS and ResearchILD has come up with 5 components for executive function. When you look online or go to different seminars, etc., you'll see variations of these 5 components. We'll start at the top at 12 o'clock, organizing, which is categorizing and sorting information, prioritizing, which is figuring out what's important and setting realistic expectations, shifting flexibly, accessing working memory, and that involves juggling information in the brain, and self-checking, which is recognizing and fixing the most common kinds of mistakes we make, and also self-monitoring. So we'll look at how the 5 components of executive function influence our daily lives by looking at just a few questions and scenarios. So how did you remember to log into this webinar today? So you needed to use your executive function skills, and one of them has to do with memory. Your family wants to eat dinner at 7 and you are the cook. How do you get the food on the table in time? Well, that requires organization, goal setting, and time management, all executive function skills. Someone cuts in front of you at the supermarket checkout lane. What keeps you from yelling? That involves self-monitoring, shifting flexibly your perspective. Maybe the person who cut in front of you had something urgent to do, and so they had to cut in front of you. So you need to be able to take that perspective as well. The clock is ticking loudly in the room where you are reading a book, but you don't hear it. Why? Again, that has to do with self-checking and self-monitoring your own behavior and your attention. And finally, you've been elected the leader of a family Zoom event. What do? That involves so many executive function skills, but primarily it's organizing and goal setting. So you can see that the executive function processes and the components are really part of our daily lives. So metacognition is executive function, and it really is about knowing yourself as a learner. And that's something that we often don't do with our children, or both in school and at home. And we want our kids to understand their strengths and weaknesses. And it's something that we should do by having kids self-assess. What do they think of themselves as readers, as mathematicians, as ball players, artists, etc.? Where do they see their strengths and their weaknesses? So how is executive function different at home and at school? And how is it the same? So if we think about organizing as one executive function skill, and categorizing and sorting information, in school, you organize your desk and your locker, and at home, you have to organize your workspace, your closets, your toy box, etc. Goal setting. In school, we have to attend classes, and we may have goals for improving our grades. At home, you may want to learn to ride a bike without training wheels, and that is a goal that your child will be setting. Shifting flexibly, another component, which is switching easily between approaches. and looking at something in a new way. So in school, kids, and this is really challenging for kids when they're learning how to decode. So they need to know that the sound that O-U-G-H makes in tough and in dough have the same spelling, but with totally different sounds. And they have to be able to flexibly shift their mindset. In math, the ability to solve math problems in a variety of ways. And at home, for a youngster, you learn to tie your shoes with bunny ears. And as you get older, you learn the loop and wrap method. So those are all different examples of shifting flexibly. Accessing working memory is juggling information in your brain. In school, a typical example of that is solving mental math problems. At home, it could be steps to using the washing machine or simple directions for walking back and forth to school, trying to keep that in your memory. And self-monitoring and self-checking, reviewing for common errors, recognizing and fixing those mistakes. In school, typical proofreading assignments, monitoring your behavior so you don't call out without raising your hand. At home, taking turns for playing a game. If your children are out with you at a restaurant, being able to wait for food in a restaurant requires self-regulation and self-monitoring. So you can see that executive function happens in a variety of contexts, and that's something that we need to understand, and as we make the connection between home and school. In this slide, what executive function processes are students using at school and at home? So this is something just to think about. How do children use organization at school, and how do they use it at home? If you're listening to this webinar, just jot down a few examples. How do children use time management at school and at home? And how do they use working memory at school and at home? We went over, I gave you some examples, but there are so many more that you can come up with. So even though executive function demands may look different between school and at home, like waiting for food in a restaurant is very different from monitoring your behavior so you don't call out, or tying your shoes with the loop and wrap method is very different than decoding words tough and dough. The reality is that there are many similarities among the executive function processes that you're going to be using at home and in school.
Executive function, you've already seen how it can be used differently in different functions, different contexts. So you've seen how it can be used in school, and you've seen how it can be used at home. Executive functions are also biological and developmental in that they may be part of genetics that are interfering or regulating some of the activities related to executive function. And it depends on developmental, where you are developmentally. As you get older, you tend to develop executive function abilities and you get better at certain things. So you have to keep in mind not only the context that these executive functions are occurring, but also thinking about the pieces that come from the person, from the student, from the child that are biological, and also the age, the grade level, where that student is developmentally as they develop these executive function skills and how that affects your expectations. So let's think about what is developmentally appropriate. And you can think about it in sort of this way. So what is a child supposed to, or what should a child be able to do independently at, say, a particular grade level or particular age? What should that same child be able to do with maybe a little extra guidance or a little extra support? And then which tasks are beyond their current abilities? That's something that maybe they should just not be doing yet. They're not ready developmentally. And so you have to think about tasks in these ways and where they are developmentally, where these children are developmentally in terms of whether they should be attempting to do things independently or with some support, or maybe just not yet. So let's think about grade levels where children should be able to do the following things. So what I'd like you to do is think about these things, maybe jot them down. What grade level, at what grade level do you think a child should be able to follow multiple step directions? Maybe independently, maybe with support. Think about the difference there and think about your own expectations. If you are a parent and a teacher, think about, are those expectations the same? Do you think about your own children and when they should be able to do these things versus your students in your classroom? Think about keeping materials at home and school organized. At what grade level should a child be able to do that with support or actually independently? And then planning a large or a long-term project, maybe something that involves multiple steps, something that might take maybe a couple weeks, maybe a month. At what point should a child be able to do that independently or with your guidance and support? So think about how different tasks affect your expectations and whether those expectations might be different if you're looking at it from the perspective of the teacher versus the perspective of a parent. So expectations can be different depending on the context. And as adults, we need to regulate those expectations. And we need to understand that executive function difficulties sometimes occur and that sometimes children have different strategies or none at all, and we need to help them. And that these executive function abilities are developmental. They may have biological components, and they definitely do depend on the context in which they are being used. So knowing that as adults, we can regulate how we ask children to do things, what tasks we ask them to do, and what we expect from them. When we have explicit instruction and we can repeat practice for these kids, that's how we can improve executive function. So we can provide them with strategies, teach them strategies, support them in strategies, whether we are at home or in school, so that they can develop a toolbox of strategies they can use to be more successful in the things that they do. We can support executive function across grade levels, across ages. We need to teach strategies that meet the demands that are placed on our children, both at school and at home. And we need to see those connections and be able to bridge that gap when we talk about students using these strategies, understanding that an organizational strategy may be used differently at school than it is at home, but that the foundation is the same and that we can really reinforce what's being learned in the other location and in the other context.
You should have the picture now that executive function strategies are critical for success in school and essential for all of us at home as well. And now what we'd like to do is start to go into some very specific strategies. So we've all seen exploding backpacks and handbags that are like black holes where we can't find anything, and desktops on computers with dozens of icons that we can't find anything on our computer as well. So let's see how we can adjust that. I'd like you to just take a look at these questions for a second. How do your children organize their assignments now? Do they use a different binder for each subject or one large binder? Do they color code notebooks and binders by subject? What type of backpack do they use? How is it organized? Where do they do their homework? What does the space look like where they're doing their homework? What do they do with papers that they don't think they need, but are afraid to throw away? If you know the answers to these questions, then you have a really good idea of how your child or your student is organized. If you don't know the answers to these questions, then you have your first homework assignment. So this is an example of a room that needs some organization. And the lack of organization really results in parents and teachers nagging and criticizing. And we all know when we nag as parents and when we're too critical as teachers, kids very often just shut down. So the problem is also, as we talked about earlier, if teachers and parents always take over when a student can't find something in a desk or can't find something in the bedroom, the child really doesn't see the need to be organized because they're always going to be rescued by the adult. So your goal is to help the student move from can't do yet to can do with support, and ultimately to can do independently. So this is an example of a student who is not too organized. And again, if we go in as a parent, for example, isn't it easier to just go into your child's room and organize it? Or if this is your spouse or significant other's desk area, you go in and you just fix it up. And then it's great temporarily, but that's not helping that person learn how to organize. So an organized student at home needs to have a couple of things at hand. And one of them is a toolkit. So pens and pencils, markers, whatever they need, they should have accessible to them at their desk or work area. And it's really good to have one of those toolkits in school and one at home. There are things that we can do to help our kids, especially younger ones. And one is a laminated tag for a backpack, which has them understand what they need to remember. And then another way to avoid nagging your child, and teachers can do this in school as well, when the desk is organized, the work area is organized, whether you've helped them in the learning process, you have a list, they figured out what to do, and the desk looks like the photo in this slide, take a photo of it. And then when your child's desk area or in school, their desk is totally disorganized, there's no nagging, just show them the photo or have them take out the photo and just say, you know what, it would be great if your desk area could get back to looking like this, rather than either doing it for them or just being critical about it. So this is a strategy that we've seen that it's extremely helpful to both parents and teachers. So the organized student at home, this is really simple. And for parents, again, it's identifying a well-organized workspace. And during COVID, this was outrageously challenging for so many of us when you have multiple people in your home needing their own workspaces. My workspace was my dining room table. My daughter had a bedroom. Somebody else had an office space, but we made it work and it became our workspace. And that workspace had, for example, what that person needed, and it was off limits to anybody else. And we photographed the workspace and we established a routine for keeping that workspace organized. For example, if my workspace is at the dining room table, I need to move everything off when it's time for dinner. But I was able to set aside a space where I was able to move everything, no one else touched it, and then I could move it back. You also, for your young children especially, you want to create a routine for organizing backpacks, whether it's at the end of every week, every Sunday night, whatever it is, you set up a routine that your child knows so that they can organize their backpack. And at the beginning, they're going to need your support. But again, let's remember the goal is for them to do it independently. So Michael Gertler, one of the directors at SMARTS, asked this question to a group. How much time do students think teachers spend organizing per week? So I'd like you to just think about it for a second. So those of you who are teachers are probably grinding your teeth and saying, that's ridiculous. I spend hours organizing per week. Why would my student think I only spend 30 minutes? We'll talk about that in a second. How much time do students think parents spend organizing per week? Think about what your child might say if you're a parent. So I'm sure those of you who are parents are laughing when you see this, because you also know that you spend hours organizing your household, your children, your life each week. So why are the responses like this? 30 minutes for teachers, 0 minutes for parents. It's because we are not articulating and demonstrating to our kids how we organize. So if you want a child to learn organization skills, you need to model that for them, and you need to articulate, for example, something as simple as when you come home from the grocery store and you're putting the groceries away, let your child know how they're organized. Refrigerators make it pretty simple. They have a vegetable drawer. They may have a drawer for cheeses. They have shelves where certain things, only big bottles can fit. But you should go through it with your child, young children, so that they see how you organize. And when you're helping them learn these skills, verbally go through it, not just doing it. So kids need to see that organization is a key component to being successful. So again, talk about organization all the time, not just when things are messy. That I think is really important, because when things are messy and you want your child to clean it up at home or in school, it's an in the moment mode, and they're not really learning the strategy. So try and do it in a less confrontational time.
So modeling is very important, as Jane said, in terms of showing our children what we're doing for organization. It's also very important to show children some direct strategies. And so we're going to show you the 4 C's strategy for organization. It is something you can use if you are a teacher, you can use with your classroom. And if you're at home, you're a parent, you can use it with your own children. This is a strategy that can cross contexts, and you'll see that very soon. Organization is about making categories. And so this lesson, and this will be in the format of a lesson here, just so you can see what a lesson from Smarts Elementary would look like. This is something you could follow with the idea of categories. Organization is all about making categories. And so we would start with, what is a category? And so we would move through some examples. So in order to be able to use the 4 C's strategy, a child needs to know what a category is. So we would maybe present this group of pictures, and we would say there are possible categories in this group of pictures. So as you would look at these, you might say, okay, that's probably a group of animals, and that's probably a group of footwear, right? So you might see those immediate categories. If you were asking a child to do this, you might also hear, maybe there's things that are brown, or, things that have eyes versus things that have laces. You have different categories that you could put things into, right? If you had this whole group, even within the animals, you might say, well, we have a zoo animal, a pet, and we have a farm animal, right? You might say that we have in the footwear section, we might have different colors, we might have different sizes of shoes, tall shoes, we might have different materials. You can categorize in a number of different ways. So teaching kids how to categorize is one of the kind of prerequisites to using this strategy. Then you might give some examples, like, what categories do you see in this closet? So you might have your student look at this picture and come up with some categories. And so you might, as you're looking at this picture, you might say, well, there's maybe a category for footwear. Maybe you want to be more specific. You might say there's a category for handbags or hats or shirts or blouses or dresses, things like that. So you might categorize this closet, which I think we would say is the envy of all our closets right here. But this is a way to organize that closet by categories. We would also use in this lesson what's called the junk drawer activity. So you think about, whether you have a junk drawer at home or maybe how many junk drawers you have at home. And then you think about how could you organize those junk drawers? We might say, well, a junk drawer is a junk drawer because it's not an organized group of things. But you might look at say these pictures here, and you might say, well, maybe I could categorize them by toys versus, things that we need every day or something like that. There are different categories within this group of pictures. So what you might do if you're in school, you might take a part of the classroom and you might say, how could we organize this space? How could we organize this desk? Whatever place needs to be organized. If you're at home, you could open up a drawer and you could say, what categories do you see in this drawer? And so you might be able to actually organize that junk drawer. All systems of organization are built on categories. So once we've established what a category is, we can then move on to how we can use categories to organize the materials in our lives. So now we would really guide instruction, and that would be a lot of modeling. So we talked about how important that is. This is the 4 C's strategy. So you'll notice that it is a cycle, so it can start at any point. We have clean, customize, categorize, and continue. You can start this at any point. You might, if you were starting at the beginning of the year, you might start with maybe categorizing, or you might start with cleaning out if there's a lot of things to clean out first before you get into actually organizing. So we're going to start with clean as the first one, because that might be a situation where you have a lot of things that maybe don't need to go in that space. So if you're going to clean based on the 4 C's strategy, you would take things out that you don't need. For example, you might take things like papers. If you were in a classroom, you might take some papers that you don't need to be used in the future. You would recycle or whatever you need to do so that those things are not in that space anymore. And to do that, you can create 2 categories. You can have a keep category and you can have a throwaway category. Okay, so you might say, science notes. Should that go in the keep pile or should that go in the throwaway pile? Right, and so that we're probably going to need those. That's going to be in the keep pile. You might then take this homework from, a while ago, cursory definition, superfluous definition. I'm not sure. I don't know if I need that. Oh, maybe I do need that. And so you would put it back in the keep side. We've got these random true false answers, not really sure what that's for. Maybe that would go in the throwaway side, right? And then you might have a bit of a note. How do I do this? 2x minus 7 equals 3. Hey, what's up? Not much, you, nothing, LOL. And a little bit of notes between students, right? That might be able to be thrown away or recycled too. So you have this idea that you can sort things into these different categories, keeping and throwing away. And that is, oh, we need to keep that. We need to keep that because that's going to help us with their organization. A banana peel, probably not, right? So you can go through this process and you can get something clean. The next step is customizing, and that is where you individualize the strategy for a student. So you can use tools to help with the process, and that's based on what you know about the student, what the student knows about himself or herself. So you can customize this strategy so it's not just a generic strategy. So in this case, you might use certain types of folders, binders, things like that to organize notes. You might use dividers and tabs. You might label things in a certain way. If you're organizing a closet at home, maybe you're using crates or boxes. Maybe you're labeling things or color coordinating things. You're customizing your organizational system based on what's going to work for the person using the system. And so that's the customize step. Categorize is the next step because you know now you have the tools. You've already cleaned out the things that you don't need. So now you can categorize and organize the materials that need to be in the space. And this is where you first determine which categories you're going to use to do this. And then you figure out what goes in each category. In this case, you're going to use the tools that you purchased or made based on the customized stage, and you're going to be able to organize the space. So for example, you have categories, maybe you have, I'm going to categorize my academic material by science and by math. That might be one way that you categorize your notes. Maybe within that, you can say what is related to tests, what is related to notes, what is review, what's homework. You can categorize even within those subject areas also. And the last step is continue, and that's how you're going to maintain the system that you've developed. You need to have the system organized, and you need to be consistent and set aside time at the end of each day, each week, each month, or when are you going to need to revisit the system and make sure that it's still organized. This is a good example of when you might use the photograph that you've taken, as Jane presented, of the organized desk, the organized backpack, the organized closet, whatever it is. That will help you figure out when you need to revisit the organizational system so you can continue to manage the system and keep it well organized. So this is something, if you do this, you will save time, make sure you save time to do this, and it will save time. It's kind of double meaning here. You can save time in that you will be organized. You can find papers when you need them, and you can make the efforts count. So if you're trying to work towards something, you don't want to then lose your results. You don't want to lose the products and not be able to find them. Having this stage keeps things working, keeps things organized, so you can meet your goals and you can keep things moving effectively so your time and effort are not wasted. Okay, so think about how you could use this 4 C's strategy to stay organized. How could you go through this process? Think about maybe if there's a place in your home or in your classroom where you could use this strategy yourself, and maybe even model it to your students or to your child. Within the lesson, what we also do in the classroom is we would have a backpack relay race where we would take a couple kids would volunteer maybe to have their backpacks out, and we would ask who can find something the fastest, who can find their math notebook the fastest, their agenda the fastest, things like that. If you're home, you could do this with maybe your child's backpack and then maybe a really organized backpack. And you could look at the difference in time it takes to find something the way it is versus if it were organized. That might be something that you could do. You could do it with different spaces too. You could do it with a closet. You could do it with a desk at home, even if you're not in the classroom, or a desk in the classroom. You can try it with different areas, different spaces, different materials that you could have organized. So let's just try this. If you are at home, you might think about, what is on your desk right now? So if I were to say to you, how fast can you find a pen or pencil? How fast can you find a piece of paper? How fast can you find a stapler? Maybe a highlighter, or maybe some sticky notes. So you can see, you can think about, those are the things you might have in your desk. What if I said, where's your cell phone? Or where's a calculator or some other device? See if you can find things and how quickly you can find things. And that will help you determine how much you need to use that 4C strategy to organize your space.
The next section is about time management. And you're going to see how time management and organization are so interrelated with each other. So this is a photo of my friend's kitchen before cooking for Thanksgiving. It actually was her son who was doing the cooking. And it's a perfect example of an organized cook. It is every recipe that was going to be used for Thanksgiving was on the counter. And then the ingredients, all of the dry ingredients or the things that didn't have to be refrigerated, were also out there. Why would I pick this photo as an example for both organization and time management? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. If you are really organized when you're getting ready to prepare Thanksgiving dinner, it's going to save you a lot of time. And Mindy had mentioned that before, the idea of saving time. So when we go through this section about time management, keep in mind that we're also talking about organization. Time management looks different in elementary school, middle school, and high school, because the elementary, middle school, and high schoolers' day is very different. Even though they all may be going to school from 8:30 to 3, for example, what happens during that day looks pretty different. In elementary school, students need to be able to understand their daily schedule, estimate the amount of time their work may take, and remember to complete homework assignments. So when you walk into an elementary school classroom, you usually will see the daily schedule on the whiteboard. On a board, sometimes teachers in elementary school have something made of fabric with slots where they put in each of the day's activities at a certain time, and those activities change from day to day, so that the kids become used to seeing what that schedule will look like. What's a prerequisite for elementary school students to be able to estimate how much time it will take to complete homework? Well, they're going to need to understand the concept of time and to tell time. So when you're asking a child who doesn't know how to tell time to estimate, that becomes very challenging. But there are some tools that can help, and I just want to show you one. So a time timer you can purchase for home or for school. In school, many teachers had what we used to call a Judy clock, which would show the passage of time. And I took a quote from Time Timer: "By giving your child the independence and confidence to track their own time while learning at home, you can help ease the transition to in-home learning." And clearly, they came up with this when we were talking about remote learning last year. So this timer, the red disc disappears as time elapses. So if your child is at home and they are going to do their homework for 15 minutes, for example, you would set the timer and then they would see the time go by as the red would appear over that 15-minute period. This is one way and very strategically helpful for a child to start to learn the concept of the passing of time. And again, what we're trying to do here, and it says it in the quote as well, is we would like kids to be more independent. So this is a tool that you can use to help your child at home, and in school, teachers have additional tools that are similar to this. So for teachers for children in grade 2, teachers might give them a homework check-in sheet, and this is an example for the child to check off each box as they complete each homework assignment. And they have these, a teacher can create this for different grade levels. So one of the questions that I got asked so often during the past year and a half was how to make homework time calmer. And again, homework takes time. Children need to be organized. We need to manage their time. They need to learn how to manage their time. And so these are just a couple of things to make homework time calmer. The first is to encourage your child to talk about what went right at school, because when they come home and they're going to be doing their homework, if they start off by talking about everything that went wrong at school, and then you say to them, and now you go, after you had such a difficult day at school, now you're going to do your homework, it becomes even more challenging. So we find that if you can encourage the positive and have your child talk about what went right at school, you're putting their mindset in a better frame. You want to plan as much as you can a consistent start time for doing homework. That will vary from day to day because children have after school activities that they want to be involved in. And clearly last year that was very limited because of COVID. My only concern for the upcoming year is that parents will want to make up for the lost time and they will have all these activities planned for their children after school and the kids will become overscheduled. There's actually a book called The Overscheduled Child. So when you're helping your child manage their time, look at what has to be done during their school day. And we're going to be going over that later. But for homework, on a day-by-day basis, try and plan a consistent start time. We said we want kids to be independent, but being realistic, for young children especially, they may need your help when they're doing their homework. So it is very helpful and using time efficiently if you can be available and nearby in case your child needs help. Hence, very often for young children, their favorite place to do their homework and the most convenient place for you to have them do their homework is the kitchen table, because they will then be able to ask for help when they need it. For young children, well, for anyone, but certainly for young children, they need to take breaks. It's unrealistic to expect that a child who's in third grade or fourth grade could be able to sit there for an hour doing their homework without taking breaks. And certainly when they're younger, that time frame is even shorter when they can do their homework before taking a break. So you want frequent short breaks during which your child is allowed to move around, and they need that physical movement. And you want to be able to plan some sort of fun activity that they will be able to do afterwards. So here's an example of a list that teachers have had in classrooms and parents could have at home. And these are just examples of brain breaks. So if you have dice, a child would roll the dice or roll a die. And depending on what number comes up, here's the activity that they would do. For young children, they find this to be fun. They don't have to think too much about it. You could do a brain break with your child at home, and you and your child decide what those breaks should be, and either again using die or just letting them choose what break they should be taking. But the point really is that having that brain break is essential. So this is an example of Ellie's chart, and she's a fourth grader, and this again has to do with homework. And Ellie can tell time. So if we look at the chart, you'll see what her assignment is and the purpose. And then there are two columns, estimated and actual. And that is very important when you're helping your child develop time management skills, both in school and at home. So the estimated time was Ellie thought it would take her 8 minutes to do the assignment, but in reality, it took her 15 minutes. So she says, why were the times same or different? And she said, it was harder than I thought. And what you're trying to do by having your child estimate and then actual is be prepared to manage their time effectively. So if a child can tell time and they can estimate the amount of time, moving forward, for example, when Ellie is planning how much time she should set aside for math, she may set aside 15 minutes rather than 8 minutes. And it's a more realistic view. This is an example of a fifth grader's planner. And there are many schools that have planners that they want the kids to use. And their day requires more time management and more organization. So time management at home here are just some suggestions for making morning times calmer. And in the morning, we're all rushing to get out of the house, or during COVID, rushing to get to our desks. So now we have to figure out how can we make that morning time calmer. And one suggestion is the planning the night before. So you can establish and review the morning routine with your child. You want to, together with your child, create a chart that details the sequence of morning activities. And this is something that you should do with your child and not just hand your child something. Or if it's a child who's not able to read yet, you're giving them visuals, do it with the child so you can come up with a sequence that makes sense for you and for your child. Making decisions the night before, for example, selecting clothes the night before, making lunch the night before, will help you save time in the morning. And clearly, packing up the backpack at night with all the organization tools that Mindy described in the 4 C's will help you save time and have a much calmer morning. Again, how to make morning times calmer. In the morning, have a reliable alarm clock, or now we have Alexa. Another suggestion for parents that we've found to be successful is awaken your child with a gentle touch. Let light into the room. Plan breakfast that works for you and your child. So again, that's something that you can also ask your child the night before, because for some children, if you say to them at 7 o'clock in the morning, what do you want for breakfast? It's another 10 minutes until they've gone through all the options and have come up with their answer. And again, how to make morning times calmer. Reward your child for following the morning routine and for being able to get out of the house on time. So in middle school, kids also have to be able to move from class to class according to their schedules. And in most middle schools, they're departmentalized. So that's a change for kids. And I often saw when kids went into 6th grade, that was what they were most concerned about. Would they get to class on time? How would they know where to go, etc.? So that's a big change. And teachers practice this with your students at a time when they don't actually have to be at the class, but practice having them walk from class to class at the beginning of the school year so they can figure out how quickly they have to walk to get to where they're going. It seems to be especially true when kids are moving from an academic class to gym, or an academic class to the cafeteria or the art room, because those rooms may be spread around the building. Middle schoolers also have to juggle homework and other after-school priorities. And generally in middle school, those after-school activities increase. And they may have to start tracking homework assignments over a longer period of time. In elementary school, most of the assignments are on a daily basis. You get a homework assignment on Tuesday, it's due on Wednesday. As children get older, they have to do more planning and more time management. They may get a homework assignment on a Monday, it's not due until Thursday, or a homework assignment on a Friday that's not due until a Tuesday. And they need to be able to have those skills in order to be able to organize their time. So this is just an example of a typical 7th grader's time management, their planner. And you can see that they were using different colors to identify different subjects. This is a tool that is very helpful for organization. And if it helps the child being organized, it's going to help them with their time management. This is an 8th grader. Again, this is one, and this is part of the SMARTS program, where the students have to manage their time by using this type of a calendar, and it's after school that's most critical. This is something that teachers should be doing with their students, having them put down the activities that they're required to do after school. And again, parents can do the same thing. It's an eye-opener. When parents see all of the activities that their children have after school and the homework that they have to do, they will quickly know when they see a visual like this, whether or not their child actually has time for all of the after school activities. So high school, it just is similar to middle school, but take it a step further, because in high school, I would say that the homework assignments and the long-term homework assignments are more plentiful than either middle school or elementary school. And in high school, it may start in middle school, but certainly in high school, the after school activities become more plentiful as well. Kids start to join sports teams, drama club, literary magazines, the school newspaper, student government. The list can go on and on. So they may start that in middle school, but in high school, they really have a full plate. And so managing their time is even more important. So for the breaking down a large task into smaller tasks is very essential, and setting a schedule for completing each of the small tasks. Most of us in our school life probably had an experience where we had a long-term assignment and it was the night before and we hadn't really looked at it that carefully. And now we had to do this assignment and there weren't enough hours left for us to complete the assignment. So I think that what kids need to do is to work backwards from the due date. So if something is due on October 1, work backwards to see when they should be completing each subtask. And students need help with this at the beginning, and they may need reminders. It's very difficult to do this on their own, for students to do this on their own. And they may be resistant to doing it because they feel that it's taking time to plan this schedule. But if we can convince them that in the end, it will save them time, make them less anxious, have a calmer household, calmer time at school, they will see the benefits of doing that. For teachers, if you are planning a long-term assignment for students, I think it would be very helpful to set up some dates. For example, if it's a research assignment, when their outline is due, when note cards would be due, when a list of references that they want to look at will be due, so that they are not caught at the last minute having to do everything. And the same thing at home. If kids have a long range assignment, if they haven't done this in school, then you can help them break down the task. Certainly at home, you know if it's a long range assignment, you know if the family is going on a trip somewhere during that time frame from the beginning date of the assignment to when it's due, or there are other family obligations that you will have. So plan with your child where those obligations are, and then how they will be able to manage their time to get that long-term assignment due in on time, so they're not penalized for having it be late. So again, this is an example of an 11th grader, and they're filling in some of their own assignments and things that they have to do. Okay, so you can see another example. Again, this was from Smarts, where a child was able to get a merit badge because they were able to complete different projects. And this is an example of an adult's schedule. And this was an adult who color-coded what they needed to do. And maybe it was based on priority order, I'm not quite sure, but they probably took great comfort in being able to scribble every time something was completed. So this is something that helps an adult organize their time. So again, the goal here was to show you that organization and time management require a certain number of tools and strategies to be effective.
Prioritizing time is what you can do once you understand how to estimate time, once you understand time. So Jane showed you how to share the estimation of time, the appreciation for time with children. And so now we're going to look at a specific strategy for prioritizing time. Again, this will follow the lesson structure of SMART's curriculum. And so you will see a strategy for prioritizing time. The objectives of the lesson would be to understand the difference between what we're calling obligations, aspirations, and negotiations, and then to identify 3 personal obligations and 3 aspirations. So we look at it in general, and then we apply it to our own lives. What does it mean to prioritize? This is listing the activities that you do, grouping the activities according to their importance, and then knowing which activity you need to do first. That's what prioritizing means, and that's what children need help sometimes to figure out, what should I do first, right? You'll see the case when they come home, they have a lot of homework to do, but they're going to do this other thing first, and then the homework never gets done. And so this is a way of teaching students directly a strategy for prioritizing time. Why is prioritizing time important? Well, let's think about the fact that some activities are more important than others, right? Making those a priority ensures that they will get done. If something's important, it needs to be a priority. Important activities may have negative consequences if you don't do them. So those activities need to get done. And if they don't get done, they may have negative consequences. That's why it's important to prioritize our time. Scheduling time is also important because once we get our important activities done that we have to do, we then have time to do the fun things that we really want to do, the things that we hope to do, the things that we enjoy. So let's talk a little bit about prioritizing activities. We're going to look at obligations, aspirations, and negotiations. Obligations, first of all, the name kind of has a negative connotation because when we think we're obligated to do something, we have to do something. And that's really what it means. Obligations are have-tos. They're events or things that we must complete in order to avoid negative consequences. Some examples of this for children might be homework or projects, or maybe family events. That might be for adults too. Sometimes we have family things we have to do that are obligations. Aspirations. Those are the things that we want to do. They are events you want to participate in, that they have a set time, and they do not have negative consequences if they are not completed. So some examples of this might be watching a television show that's on at a certain time, going to a movie. It happens at a certain time, we need to be there for that movie. Taking a karate class that happens at a certain time. So these are things you want to do that also have a set time that we need to schedule and put as priorities. Negotiations are things that do not have a set time. They're flexible, they can move around. They're not as critical as obligations or aspirations, but they're things that we do. So some examples of those might be updating your Facebook page. It's something you want to do, you maybe feel you have to do, but it can fit in among the other things, the obligations and the aspirations. Baking brownies, that would be something maybe fun, maybe you enjoy the end result. It's something that you might do, but it doesn't have to happen at a certain time. It's definitely maybe unless you're making it for a particular reason, it might not be something that you're obligated to do. And then playing a video game might be something you enjoy doing. It doesn't have to happen at a certain time. So let's think about where certain activities belong. So if we think about activities, how do we know whether they're obligations, aspirations, or negotiations? So I want you to just take a little time to think about these. And if we think about taking out the garbage, ironically enough, when we do this with people to kind of judge which ones they are, 100% of people say that taking out the garbage is an obligation. So clearly that's not a very enjoyable task. People don't say, well, I want to take out the garbage, or I'll do it whenever I can, but it's not a set time. It has a set time. It needs to be done at a certain time so that it can be picked up at the curb in the morning or that day. And so it is an obligation, pretty much universal about that. Let's think about something like shopping for new shoes. And that graph is on the lower half there on the right-hand side. You can see that people don't agree on whether shopping for new shoes is an obligation, an aspiration, or a negotiation. And we actually got all three results. Most people think it's an aspiration, something that you want to do. A few people think it's an obligation, and kind of midway think it's a negotiation. You have to maybe do it, but it doesn't have to be at a certain time. And we don't need to necessarily schedule that. So you can see that sometimes what I think is an obligation might seem like something else to you. So we don't all agree on what are obligations, aspirations, and negotiations. And the context of them might change how we view these things. For example, organizing your desk. You might say, well, that's something you have to do. It's not something you really want to do. It's probably an obligation. Okay. Or maybe it's something you just do when you have time. Maybe it's a negotiation. If you have someone coming to your office or to your desk space that you want to impress, maybe it becomes an obligation. It has to get done. It's going to have negative consequences if you don't do it. Maybe it's just something, I really want it to look nice. That's just a want. Maybe it's an aspiration. It's something that you can do when you get to it. You like having a clean desk, but if you have to work with a messy desk for a little while, no big deal. Maybe it's a negotiation. So sometimes the context or the scenario that you're in may change whether something is an obligation, an aspiration, or a negotiation. So you can think about these other things too, studying for a test. Believe it or not, we had some people across the board. Some said it was an aspiration, an obligation, and some said a negotiation. So some things that may seem more obvious to you may still be different for people who look at it. Reading a book for pleasure, attending a yoga class, running 2 miles, or cooking dinner. So think about all of those as being, it depends on who was answering the question as to whether these are obligations, aspirations, or negotiations. And we do have in the SMARTS curriculum, you will have a sheet, a form, a handout that students can fill out where they sort of figure out which category certain activities go in, so they can practice this also.
The question that we want to ask are, what are the obligations, aspirations, and negotiations in your life? So you can take a sheet of paper, divide it into 3 columns, obligations, aspirations, and negotiations, and jot down some of your must-dos, should-dos, and could-dos. And again, I think that the definition of obligation, which is a must-do, and the definition that there's a negative consequence if it's not done, is very important to keep in mind for both you and your students and your child. If you're going at home, if you're going to do this, if you want your children to do this, to make the 3 columns, then you should do it also so that they can see how your time is used, how your day is packed. And it goes back to the response that we got from students about the amount of time that their parents spend organizing, and it was 0 minutes. So this would be a similar type of activity so that kids can see that you need to be organized in order to prioritize your time. This is an example, and again, in the SMARTS program, they actually have a list of activities, and they ask the students to decide whether each of those activities is an obligation, an aspiration, or a negotiation. But this is an example of somebody coming up, an adult coming up with their obligations, aspirations, and negotiations. And as Mindy said, your chart might look different because what is a negotiation for one person may be an aspiration or an obligation for another. For example, if my doctor told me that part of my exercise regimen had to be bike riding for whatever reason, that's no longer a negotiation for me. That's going to be an obligation or an aspiration. You can see here, this is an example of a to-do list, and the obligations are what is done first, and then the aspirations come afterwards. When you're planning your day, if possible, obligations should be scheduled first because they are your have-tos, and you want to avoid those negative consequences. In this example, that could mean being benched for the soccer game or not getting your project done on time and losing points. So those are obligations. Leaving for soccer practice, you're not going to be late for soccer practice because you don't want to be benched. It's also important, and this is a to-do list for Saturday, to schedule aspirations or want tos so that you have balance to your day. In this example, if you know you're planning to attend a friend's party at 7, be sure to get any other obligations that you have done before then so that you could relax and enjoy the party. So this was an example where negotiation was included, and that was an example of using free time. So when a student was able to come up with their time management chart with their planner, they could see they wanted to upload a YouTube video. When are they going to do that? Well, they have time during the day to do that, and it doesn't interfere with any of their obligations or aspirations. So what if something gets in the way? So this is, if something comes up, like friends asking you to go to a movie, it's okay to change your schedule a bit. If you have too many obligations scheduled for one day, and we're talking about over the weekend, you may not be able to be as flexible. However, in this example, 1 hour has been scheduled to upload a YouTube video, so there is time and some flexibility. As mentioned previously, a negotiation can be put off for a later time. So if you wanted to go to a movie with your friends and it's a 2 o'clock movie, you're going to have to adjust working on that science project and uploading the YouTube video. And you're going to have to figure that out because you may have time, which we don't see in this chart here, between soccer practice and the 2 o'clock movie to do some work on the science project, and then to do some work on the science project instead of watching a football game if you really want to go to that movie. So you're giving your child some decision-making practice and also talking to them about being flexible. Now I just want to spend a minute talking about the balance that we all need to have when we're trying to prioritize our time. And this is for students. And here's a to-do list for Saturday. So if you look at the to-do list for Saturday, you can see whether or not there are a lot of obligations, a lot of aspirations, a lot of negotiations. And when you look at this, you'll see that on this child's list, Saturday is really all about aspirations and negotiations. On the Sunday list, what do we see? Chores, study for a history test, homework, English paper. Now we see all obligations. The question is, how is the student going to feel if they, on Sunday, when they have this in front of them? So when we want our kids to prioritize their time, it's not just a matter of getting everything in, obligations, aspirations, and negotiations. It's getting it there in a balanced way. This would be, you could try it again on your own: obligations, aspirations, and negotiations. Students should identify what they have to do, have it on their planner, and try and figure this out. Again, the negotiations has no time limit. So if you can't do a negotiation, the want to on a particular day and time, that can be moved without any negative consequences. This is an example from SMARTS where kids would be putting in the different activities and deciding when they wanted to do it and whether it was an aspiration, negotiation, or obligation. And also it gives them a good idea of how much time they have left in their day.
We've already talked about organization and time management. Let's shift gears now and talk about working memory. What is working memory? It's the ability to hold information in one's mind, to mentally manipulate that information. It differs from long-term memory, like math facts, remembering math facts for a long time. It differs from short-term memory, like repetition, to try to remember something for a little bit of time. You remember someone's phone number, you remember, 8 and 6 plus 3 and 4, and you keep repeating that because you're trying to remember it for a short time. Working memory is more like doing mental calculations where you have to remember, I have to carry the 1. That's an example of working memory. The best description I've ever heard about working memory was by Kalyani Krishnan, and she described it as your countertop in your kitchen. When you have a large countertop, a very effective working memory, you can do a lot of things at the same time. You have lots of space and it's very stress-free. When you have a smaller countertop, though, things get cluttered, things get frustrating. You can only do so many things at the same time, and then you become overwhelmed. You have that clogged funnel and you feel overwhelmed and frustrated. Let's talk about working memory tasks. Some examples of working memory tasks for math might be to ask students to do math in their heads. Maybe then asking them to verbalize how they did that math in their heads to another student. It also might mean completing a task that has multiple steps and doing those steps in a particular order, step by step. Let's try a little memory task of our own. Let's play Can You Remember? You will see some pictures on the next slide, and I want you to write them down or draw them, as many as you can remember, but only after 15 seconds of looking at them. So don't write anything yet. You're just going to look at them for 15 seconds. You ready? Go. Okay, stop. Now write down as many as you can remember. Think about how you're remembering these things. How do you remember these objects, these pictures that you saw? Here are the answers, and you can count how many you were able to get correct. Did you write down the words of the things that you saw? Did you try to draw the pictures? Did you have them in the order in which you saw them? What did you remember about the pictures, the shapes, the colors? What were your strategies? Think about how you tried to remember those images. How many did you remember? What strategies did you use to help you? Remember that different people may have used different strategies. Now let's try it again with words. Can you remember? You will see some words on the next slide and try to write down as many as you can after looking at them for 15 seconds. Are you ready? Go. Stop. How many do you remember? Write down what you remember now. Again, think about the strategies you use to remember them. Did you remember them in a particular order? What did you use to remember those words? Here are the words. See how many you got correct? How many did you remember? What strategies did you use to help you? Did you try to picture images to remind you of the words? Did you look at the shape of the words or the length of the words? Or maybe the first letter of each word? Did you try to create a story using the words or some other imagery to try to remember the words in order? Did order matter? Did you just look at them over and over again, left to right or up and down? Think about the strategies you used and realize that other people probably use different strategies. Which one, the pictures or the words, was easier for you? Working memory can get overloaded. You may have felt that one or the other was easier, and you may have had an easier time thinking of strategies to remember those items. But when you are overloaded, when you couldn't think of that picture or that word, how did it feel? What are the emotions that we tie to feeling like we can't get it? Working memory overload can be very frustrating. Here are some working memory strategies that we can teach children. The first is mnemonics, devices that serve as memory aids that can improve a student's ability to remember something that's challenging or unfamiliar, or the specific order or details or sequences of information. These often depend on what the student already knows or has experienced in order to make associations. But you've seen some of these in school or things that you have maybe remembered from school. PEMDAS. Sound familiar? FACE. Roy G. Biv. Every good boy does fine. My very eager mother just served us 9 pizzas. Or nachos. Do you remember what those things mean? I'll leave that for your pondering later. Checklists. Those are things that can help support working memory, put less of a burden on working memory. For example, you have a little checklist. This is what I need to bring when I go home. This is what I need to bring when I go to school. Some people use sticky notes or some other type of reminder. Working memory strategies might be cartoons. Cartoons use visual clues to help students make connections so they can remember the important information. It's good for students who like to learn visually and are especially helpful when learning new vocabulary words. Associations are words or ideas that connect learned information with other familiar concepts. For example, you may remember the definition of the word truncate by creating a sentence like, the truncated tree trunk was cut down too far. Acronyms. Those are letter sequences that may or may not spell a word, but include the first letters of the words in a phrase or list. For example, Holmes refers to the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, and Superior. Crazy phrases are silly made-up phrases or sentences designed to help students remember the specific order of information. For example, you may have learned never eat soggy waffles to remember north, east, south, and west. You may have a different version of that, but those help you remember the directions in order. Crazy phrases are often more effective the sillier they are. Let's also look at visualizing and storytelling as methods for remembering things and reducing the load on working memory. Again, following the SMARTS lesson structure, we start with a metacognitive activator. Let's do a guided visualization. Get comfortable, and we'll do a little meditation. Place your attention in the center of your body. You may want to close your eyes, take a few breaths, and allow your body to relax. Imagine you are at your favorite place to go in the summer. Do you have it? Are you indoors or outdoors? What does it look like in your mind? Take a few moments to recall the colors and the sounds of this favorite place. Are there any special smells or scents connected to this place? Take a deep breath and fill your mind with these scents. Imagine the warmth of the sun enveloping you as you relax and enjoy your favorite snack. Ah, you are so happy and relaxed. Suddenly, an animal enters your space. You are startled, but you offer it a nibble of food from your snack. Where was your favorite place? What smells did you remember? What kind of animal did you visualize? What type of food did it eat? What would you have done next? Was this difficult for you to picture? Why or why not? Think about those questions and think about the experience of visualizing and using your senses to imagine a situation. This is a strategy you can use for a lot of different things, but one thing is to reduce the burden of working memory. Let's try a little activity. How well do you know the parts of the leg? You may already know the parts of the leg, but we're going to show you a way to remember the parts of the leg. So let's do a little pretest. Pause the video and jot down where you think these different parts go on this picture. When you're done, turn it back on. Let's give you a strategy now. It's called Elvis Pelvis. You're going to try and visualize the story as you hear it. You can close your eyes if you want to. Elvis Pelvis and Lemur Femur entered a restaurant eager to eat their favorite Nutella Patella sandwich. However, their server, Timmy Tibia, told them a fibula that they were out of the special sandwich and presented them with a parcel of tarsals instead. Now, how well do you know the parts of the leg? Again, pause the video and see if you can remember the parts in order based on the visualization and story. When you're ready, turn it back on. Compare the results from your first quiz to your second one. Were you able to get more of the answers correctly? Did you improve? Why or why not? How did visualizing and listening to the story help you remember the parts of the leg? Your turn. Here's an example of a way to tell a story to remember a math fact. 8 and 8 got sick on the floor. 8 times 8 is 64. This is a common little phrase learned in elementary school. Now you try it. Create a story or rhyme for one of these facts that will help you visualize and remember the information. Reflection. How well did that strategy work for you? How many stars out of 5 would you rate visualizing and storytelling? Why and when would you use this strategy? These are the types of questions you would use with children after you introduce a strategy like visualizing and storytelling. It's an important part of strategy instruction to facilitate executive function development. These types of reflections can be used at home or in the classroom to remember different things that you might need to remember. Maybe it's the parts of the leg, or maybe it's a procedure that has to be done at home, how to do a particular chore, or where different things are that you need to find in the house. All of these strategies that we've talked about are very important to be taught directly and explicitly and to be modeled to children as they learn to develop their executive function. Now we're going to talk about how to make the connection between home and school.
The key question here is, how do we build that bridge between home and school? And we've given you, we hope we've given you a lot of examples of how that can be done for organization, time management, working memory. And so how do we get this all to be integrated? So first, expectations have to be very clear and reasonable. And if you can think back to the beginning of this workshop where Mindy was going over the zones of proximal development, and we want to avoid expectations that increase the anxiety because a child is not developmentally ready. So an easy example would be expecting a child to manage their time in a way that they can't do because they don't understand the concept of time passing and they cannot tell time. I did say that you could use a time timer, but clearly the child needs your support in doing that. So strategies should be visible and taught explicitly, and teach strategies for challenging tasks, help students understand why the strategy use is important, and model your own strategies. And again, this is all because our long-term goal is to be independent, and strategies need to be taught purposefully and very explicitly. Executive function strategies are often not taught explicitly because many of us think that kids, well, they just will learn it. They won't. Just like they need to learn how to read and how to do math, they need these strategies taught explicitly and modeled for them. We want our kids to diminish their impulsivity, so we can put in some structures that help them with that. External structures help. Rules to remember, like stop and think, breathe and count to 3. Some mindfulness breathing and meditation and breathing is very helpful. Again, clear expectations, give verbal and visual cues, just like this for a child, and alternatives for negative behaviors. So very often kids who are fidgety will have these little fidgets that they can have in class, and that helps them diminish their impulsivity. This is very important for kids, and very important for kids both in school and at home. So one of the steps in bridging that home-school connection is to accentuate the positive. Make sure you deliver the strategy in a way that acknowledges the strengths as well as the challenges of your students. And very often, comparing it to learning a sport is very helpful. Use reward systems and labeled praise. So instead of just, I like the way you got ready this morning, it's like, I like the way you were able to go through your checklist this morning so we could get out on time. Or in school, I like the way you approached your math problem and with all of the steps that you needed to do being shown in your work. Be very specific. That's labeled praise, and that helps with any skill being developed, but certainly with executive function skills. Try out strategies in other areas of your students' lives. And again, this says sports. Sports is a great way to, or through sports, to help children develop their executive function skills. Because when they're playing a sport, they have working memory that's involved, they have organization that's involved, self-monitoring, being able to check their behavior. There are so many executive function strategies that they have to apply while they are learning and participating in that sport. So this is essential because it's all about communication between teachers, parents, and students so that everybody can be on the same page and we know what we're doing. If parents are trying out a strategy at home and it's not working, let the teacher know. If teachers have strategies that they are using in school to help their students, let the parents know. And the student is the one who's providing all of the feedback, because you will be able to see in their behavior what's working and what's not working. I would actually add a 4th circle to this, and that would be coaches or art teachers for after school programs, or the piano teacher, any of the after school activities that involve learning a new skill needs to have that person who's teaching that activity in this loop of communication. So this is an example from SMARTS of how the communication between home and school is connected, how we build that bridge. And in this lesson, for example, the 4 C's strategy, there is something that goes home to the parents from the teacher that describes what was being done to teach that skill. And you can see the top has a description, and then the bottom, it says cut and return the portion below to school. So that says that the student has input, you're getting that feedback from the student, and you're also getting some information from the parent as well. So SMARTS actually has these for all of the units of study, all of the lessons, so that we can see the connection between home and school. Again, with everything we do, we need to be flexible and we need to reflect. So it's important to ask our students to reflect on their strategy use. And again, at the beginning, when I was working with students and using smarts to teach executive function skills, some students were reluctant to fill out these reflection sheets. They thought it was a waste of time. But it really is very important because you want kids to develop those metacognitive skills and to be able to understand themselves as learners. And these reflection sheets help students do that. They understand their strengths and challenges, they can reflect on their performance, and they can make plans for the next time. And it gives kids more ownership. And you also want to be flexible and let kids shift around a little bit with the strategies. And sometimes your students or your children may come up with a strategy, for example, for organization that you haven't thought of, but it works for them. So you need to be flexible in that and include their feedback in this teaching mode for executive function skills. So if you have any questions, Mindy and I would be very happy to answer them. We know that there was a lot to digest in this workshop, so feel free to get in touch with us and we'll be happy to reply to your questions. And those are our email addresses.